All right. So I use about a pound of clay for each one of my mugs. But wedging a pound of clay is sort of difficult because it's such a small piece of clay. So that's 3 pounds almost. This is 5.5. So what I might do is wedge a larger lump of clay and then cut it into smaller pieces. So you're only wedging once, and if I wedge up like 6 pounds of clay, I can cut it into 6 pieces. I'm wedging once for 6 mugs. Sound like a plan? 5.5. Now, today, I'll probably use a little more clay, because otherwise if I use too little, the demo's over too fast. It's not much clay for me to play with. So I'll use a little bit more. Now, you know, you guys are beginners and you know how much clay you lose, right? When you're throwing, and how much clay, you know, ends up in your throwing bucket. So you might have to use, you know, at least 1.5 or 2 pounds. So what I do, this isn't quite 6 pounds, but if I were gonna sit down, or 8 pounds, I might wedge up 8 pounds, is probably what I would do, and cut it into 8 pieces. Now, you're not making sets. You do not have to, these mugs do not have to match. Actually, I don't want them to match. Your job is to make a variety of shapes and sizes. Not too small. Try not to make them too small. Remember, they're going to shrink, and the clay is going to shrink how much? 11%. So you're going to be surprised how small they become. You know, I used to make huge mugs, even larger than this. Because, you know, by the time I make a cup of tea to take down to my studio and I put the lemon in it and the honey in it, and by the time I get downstairs, you know, I don't want a cup this small. I'll be done with that in 2 gulps, you know. So I used to make really big mugs, but then again, if you have a coffee maker like that, and you have people over, and you have mugs this size, you can only like serve 2 people and the pot's empty. So then I've scaled down a little bit. Okay, so if this were 6 pounds, I'd cut it into 6 pieces. Wonder if I should do 3. Well, we'll cut this into 4. Maybe too little. But see, so again, if I were going to sit down, I'd probably, oops, that's not good. 8 pounds, cut it into 8 pieces. You know, you don't want to keep getting up. Yeah, so these are about 1.5 pounds each. If I were you, you know, working too small is difficult for beginners. 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds. Okay. So how many times did we say we should wedge our clay? You remember? 150 times, yes. Shoji Hamada, famous Japanese potter, that suggested 150 times. For pulling handles, we're going to pull flat ribbons of clay. Boy, you really need wedged, aged clay. You want it really aged. So if we're doing 150 times for the mugs, how about 300 for the handles? You might have noticed these 2 buckets over here. It says handle clay. So what we were doing, some of this might be hard. Oh, this bucket's still good. It's from last semester. If it's too hard, we can reclaim it in the clay mixer. But instead of making caterpillars, well, you might want to make the caterpillars for a while, but instead of throwing them in those buckets, we throw them in the handle clay buckets. That way, we know we have aged clay for our handles. Because this clay, remember, still was mixed in November, right? It's the most aged clay you're going to have all semester. So we should,
Hold on.
we should
It's fine.
save all of that clay and maybe, stick it in the handle clay buckets for our handles, okay? We really want it aged. The more you wedge it, the more aged it becomes. Speaking of wedging, how are we doing with the wedging? Horrible. We're pushing down with the heels of our hands, and our fingertips are pulling it up. Down and up, down and up, down and up.
I can do it if I don't think about it.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you can't think about it. Down and up. Remember, you're not turning it. It will automatically turn clockwise, and the clay is spinning in a spiral manner. Okay? Down. If anything, you're rocking forward and up, but you are not turning it. Do not turn it. And you keep it on its point, not on the side. Okay? But the more you wedge, the more plastic it becomes. Obviously, the older it is, the more plastic. Okay, so we're not going to do it 300 times because of time. Okay, then you ease up on the pressure to get yourself that conical shape. To get rid of all that, just tap it on the table and roll it. And if you were throwing a piece, this is ready to be thrown on the potter's wheel. I'm going to sort of tap it into a log, and I might cut this log in half for handles because you'll see in a minute it gets a little heavy. So, all right. Now I'll slam this into a fatter coil. And as clay bits and scraps get on the table, just scrape it off into the barrel. Remember the 4 wedging tables. 1, 2, 3, 4. Scrape it, but also sponge it with your sponge. Okay. I have 3 mugs here. You want your mugs out in front of you when you're pulling handles, because obviously different size mugs are going to have different size handles, right? I'll move this clay to the potter's wheel. All right. I like to put down some newspaper to lay the handles on it. You could, well, no, that's good. Get your little needle to cut them off. All right. Has anyone done this before? In for a treat. First time I did it, so I sort of had to hide in the corner. It was a little embarrassing. Sort of like milking a cow. Although I've never milked a cow. Okay. Hold it in your left hand. Dunk your hand all the way to the wrist. You're stretching the clay between your thumb and fingers. Dunk, pull, dunk, pull. Maybe 4 pulls. You don't want it to dry out. in between pulls. Absolutely not. The older the clay, the more plastic and well wedged the clay, the better handle, the longer handle you'll be able to pull. Now, we are not making coils, we're making ribbons, okay? So we have to crunch our thumb and finger to make a ribbon configuration. It's not a coil, so we don't want to round our fingers, we want to compress them, okay? Now, so this is a really big handle. This might be appropriate for a big pitcher, right? But I got a little carried away. I need the much smaller for these mugs, so I have to like get serious about elongating it. I might have to start over. The other thing I like to do, I keep turning it because this flat ribbon, it will get sharp on the other side of the ribbon if you just keep pulling it on one side. So you flip it over and you pull the other side, and that prevents the other side of the ribbon from getting razor sharp. Now you see how long it will get because it's so nicely plastic and aged. If you want, you can put newspaper on the floor to just, soak up all the mess, so then you can just throw the newspaper away. The other thing I like to do, wet your hands, run your knuckles down that ribbon, and that gives it a little bit of a sculptural dimension, a little bit of a variety rather than just flat. Okay, the reason why you want your mugs in front of you is you want to hold them up against your mugs and you're testing it for width and thickness. Now let me lay this on the paper. I could probably get 2 or 3 handles out of this. What am I talking about? I'm talking about width in proportion to the mug. Is it too wide, too narrow? And then also thickness this way. In proportion to the mug, is it too thick or too thin? Too thick looks clunky. Too thin visually looks weak, but also you whack it on the faucet in the kitchen sink and it's gone. But also, again, if it's too thin, it could be sharp. It doesn't feel good on your hand. We are going to think about your morning coffee or your morning cup of tea. It's sort of an intimate experience. You're holding it, you're trying to wake up, the warmth, you're loving the warmth of the hot beverage, and it feels good in your hands. So you want everything to feel good. If the handle is sharp and it's too far away from the mug, it doesn't feel good, you're never going to take that mug out of the cabinet, right? It's going to just stay in the cabinet. Okay, so, whoops. Let's see, I squeezed too hard there. See if I can get rid of that. And are they going to break off on you? Yes, they are. You can just drop the broken pieces in your throwing bucket. Keep flipping it so you don't get a sharp edge. Now it's all going to be sensitivity of touch. Hold it up against your mugs for width, for thickness. If I have 3 mugs here, I want to pull way more than 3 handles because some aren't going to look good, some I'm going to drop on the floor, some I might put on and go, oh, I don't like that, I'm going to... So if you pull it off, just put it in there. So make sure you keep wetting your hand. If it dries out, that's when you break it, break a chunk off. The more plastic the clay, the more the longer the handle. So we definitely should maybe at this point forward start throwing our reclaim in these handle clay buckets. Again, there's one where the clay's nice and moist. One will have to get some of the clay out, it's a little stiff. Okay, one more. Again, don't forget the shape, the little tube that I started doing this process with. You can't have a big fat lump of clay and expect to try to pull a handle out of it. You want to pound it on the table until it's a somewhat of a fat coil, extra fat coil, right? Lots of water. If it dries out halfway down, it's gonna rip off. Knuckles, pull your two knuckles down there. Gives it that nice little dimension. Like anything else, like any other step of this process, this takes practice. It's sort of a fun thing to do though. It's very rewarding seeing that clay stretch. Okay, the pitchers that we do will have handles. The teapots that we make at last in the semester will have handles. We can pull handles for knobs on our lidded jars. So we'll be doing handles all semester as well. So remember, take a piece like this, slam it into an elongated, fatter coil. Give yourself a head start. Don't, I'll see students get this big lump of clay and try to start pulling handles off of it. Okay? Now, these, you should know what leather hard is. You get in a sense of what leather hard is because when you were doing certain textures on your cylinders, they had to be leather hard. Also, the harder the leather hard, you're going to get to know what leather hard is, and then soft leather hard, and then hard leather hard. You're going to get to know all the different stages pretty soon. Carving, to get a nice clean carve, you want it to be fairly dry. Otherwise you get all those little bits of clay. And don't be afraid to make these lines perhaps wider than you think. The problem with using maybe a thin pencil or your needle to make the lines is that once glaze goes in there, the narrow lines, it might just fill in that space and obliterate it, and you may not even see the decoration anymore. So this tool that you have, is this the R1 or the R2? This is the R1. It's got, I love that little loop down there, and if you had made your lines with the end of that loop, that would make them deeper and wider so that when glaze goes in there and fills that space, it doesn't obliterate the design. Okay, so Anna, your swirls, let me see that, the swirls on that too. Oh good, she tried impressing, or stamping, little press molds. And then she's got carving on one, because we're not keeping these. This is practice. So hopefully you got the fear of texturing a surface in clay, while we're doing these cylinders, so that you're not afraid once we get a mug. It's like, oh, I don't want to ruin my mug, right? So this is a little deeper and wider. Using that tip is a really good carving tool. I also have a set of other carving tools if you're interested. But are you getting the hang of when to texture? Impressing has to be done when it's soft, but that's right out of the barrel. Your pieces right off the potter's wheel are a little too wet, like these handles. They're too wet. If I tried to impress on these handles, I wouldn't get a good, clear impression. I'd get sort of a foggy one. So let it set up a little bit. And then the carving really has to be set up, okay? But it's good. It looks like you did some practicing with the different types of textures. Okay, so anyway, back to the leather hard. We went off on a tangent. We don't want these to get leather hard because we're going to basically bend them, generically speaking, into sort of a teardrop effect or configuration. So, and we are going to then smear that clay into the body of the mug. So we do not want these to reach leather hard. They reach the state that we call simply set up. And in the winter with the heat on, they should set up within like an hour. So this is not something that you would pull handles and then go to lunch, or pull handles and then say, I'm going to put them on tomorrow. You want to pull handles. Here's when you pull them, when your mugs are ready. Your mugs are ready, you're able to get it off the bat. That's when you pull the handles. Then you cover up your mugs in plastic while the handles are setting up. And they should be ready within an hour. Okay, now, my suggestion is to make a couple mugs, put handles on them before you go and make some more mugs. If you go through the entire process of throwing the mug, pulling and attaching a handle, you will learn way more for the next series. So don't think that, you know, I'm just going to make all these mugs and the night before they're due I'm going to pull handles and put them on. You won't learn as much. You might say, you know, because of the certain form that you make, you might discover, oh, it's too short, I don't even have room to put a handle on. Or this shape is very difficult to put a handle on. So if you go through the entire process of creating a full, finished, completed mug, then the next time you get on there to make one, you'll be thinking about the handle, you'll be thinking about placement. Placement is very important. We'll talk about that when we attach them. But you'll have more to think about and take into consideration. Okay? So we'll let these sit, then we'll move back to the potter's wheel, and we'll demonstrate how to throw a mug. Okay? Remember what we said, get up close and personal, even if the stool should even hit the wheel. Okay? Got this great apron. It's bulky, but does the trick. Remember, the wheels are spinning counterclockwise, and try to remember to turn the wheels off before you leave. Try to remember to never put your throwing bucket on the wheel, because if somebody accidentally steps on the foot pedal, like I was working here yesterday and I kept stepping on this foot pedal over here and this thing would go flying. We have had these throwing buckets go flying across the room. It makes a mess, and you don't want to clean that up. So maybe don't even put your pieces on here when you're done either. You know, cut it, take it off, put it on the shelf, try to turn it off. The wheel is spinning counterclockwise because we're all right-handed and we work on the right side of this hemisphere, this circle. We work on the right side. The Japanese work on the left and the wheel goes clockwise. The reason for that is we're working on the right. We want the clay spinning out of our hands, not coming into our hands. That would be impossible to throw. Okay? And then, basically, if you divided this circle into quarters, all the work is done in the lower right-hand quarter or quadrant. So if it were a clock, between the 3 and the 6. Don't go above the 3, don't go to the left of the 6. Okay? Now, you've all been throwing for a couple weeks. It all makes, this demo is going to make a lot more sense than the first demo did. Throw it in the center. Again, the bat should be dry, but if you want to just sort of help yourself discern where the center is, make a little wet circle, slam that down, give it a little more. Anybody like pull the whole lump of clay off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Multiple times.
Yeah, so slam it down, go like that.
I pulled the whole black one off.
Oh, the whole thing, oh, yeah, well,
Like,
yeah,
flew
the
towards
thing,
my, like,
well, yeah,
stomach.
see, the thing comes with it, yeah. That's all
But I
common.
did it.
You're not doing anything that no one else has never done before. Okay, so a third thing you can do to weld it down there is take your little yellow sponge and seal it at the base. Okay? So that's all very common. Okay, don't be afraid. Fill your water buckets to the top. You know, some of you are like halfway, quarter way. You know, you don't want to like dig all the way to the bottom. Fill it to the top. Warm water feels better. Wet your hands. You're going to use this part of your hand. Start at the bottom. Elbows anchored on my thighs. Grab that clay. Squeeze it up into a column. Try to apply even pressure on the way up so that if you rip a piece off, like how many have ripped a piece off, that just means what?
Pushing too hard at the top.
You dug in right where it broke, you dug in too hard, okay? So you can see how small this amount of clay is. I probably should have started with more than 1.5 pounds. Keep your bat clean. Not because I'm your mother or I'm trying to act like the anal compulsive potter. If it's spread out all over the bat, you don't know where to start this part of your hand, plus you're wasting the clay you wedged. You wedge that amount of clay, you want to use that amount of clay. You already know you're going to lose some. So, then you can start your fingers, or hands down there, cone it up, okay, oops, almost ripped that part off. Then you're going to push down, but notice my elbow goes into my rib cage. Push down, it starts to mushroom. So the right hand comes in. Again, scooch up close. This is not stable, okay? Up close is stable. All right, so back to that dual pressure. Left hand pushes down, the clay column starts to mushroom, so the right hand comes in. Down with your left, in with your right. Notice both of my elbows are anchored against my body. Different amounts of clay will determine where on your body your elbows are being anchored. Let go slowly. We continue to cone until we think. Now if you're efficient at coning, 3 times might be enough. Once you get the hang of this, coning it 3 times might be enough. Down with your left, in with your right. So, if your hands are moving, it's never going to center. You have to figure out how to go from here to here. Here to here. Let go slowly so you don't knock it off just taking your hands off. Okay? So that is something that everyone has to feel independently on their own. It's not so much brute strength, not with this amount of clay. Yes, when I'm throwing a 25-pound platter, I'm like, ooh, struggling, wishing I had bigger hands and more strength. That's why you have to work out. But when you've got this amount of clay, it's like, exhale, relax, don't think about everything you have to do. Easy for me to say, that's all I think about. This part of your hand. Enough water to avoid drying out in the middle of a process. Squeeze it up. Keep going or let go slowly. So now you probably have questions to ask, so feel free to ask questions. Down and in. Questions? Make sense? Now, remember we don't want to start with a big dome because it's too hard to drill down that dome to the bottom. So if you then compress this into sort of a hockey puck shape, and how do we do that? Down and in, down with your left, pushing down with your left, in with the fingertips of your right hand. You see that? So I've maybe reconfigured my hands, but I'm still applying that dual pressure. Down with my left, in with my right. Is that clear to everyone? Does that make sense? Down and in. Notice how steady my hands are. Don't talk, don't chew gum. Two things of which I am doing. Questions? Clean your bat and clean your room.
So when you're pushing down after the coning, it's more of like, I saw you using your thumb and then on top, kind of?
Oh, see, I have to stop and analyze what I do.
As opposed to when you were
Well,
making the hockey puck. Because I feel like when I was doing
after
it,
the coning,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was doing.
I was like
I'm,
smashing it down
using
with
the
like,
heel and pushing it
oh,
down.
the heel.
yeah.
How
Oh,
are you doing?
So-
well, what I'm doing is I'm sort of cupping my hand over it, because when you use the whole hand and you're cupping the hand, it's a lot stronger than if you're just doing like parts of your hand. Let me analyze that, what I'm doing. Squeezing up. So you're saying when I'm pushing down, it looks like I'm using my thumb? Oh, this fleshy part of my hand?
Yeah, maybe that's.
Ah, see? I
Yeah,
have
you're
to
like grabbing it because I was going like, I don't know. I don't even know.
because
That's what I
this
was
is,
doing.
you know, again, depending on the size of the clay, this is such a small piece of clay and it's got this little tiny little column here. So yes, I see that I'm using this fleshy part of my hand to push down, but notice my elbow is anchored in my rib cage because I need to keep this whole arm, wrist, pivoting wrist, and hand rock solid. So yes, okay, so these fingers are cupping while this is pushing down. Nevertheless, it's a down and then in pressure. I think, Megan, good question. It's because of that tiny little thing at the top.
Okay.
Yeah, so just what I said, depending on the size of the clay. Now see, look at how much, not much clay. You're gonna have to slow this demo down. Down and in. However you reconfigure your hands, if you can anchor on your thighs or anchor in your rib cage, you have to keep, you know, you've got all these pivot points at the elbow, you know, your shoulders, your elbows, your wrists. How do you keep all of that steady? I'm pushing down now with this part of my hand. Nevertheless, it's still down. And instead of my heel pushing in, now it's my fingertips that come around over my hand, and it's the fingertips that are pulling in while my palm is pushing down. But the bottom line is, if my hands are moving like this, if my hands are moving, never gonna center. So everybody has to feel for themselves how to stop it. And I'm telling you, the more you practice, then you will come in and you will have that aha moment and you'll be like, oh my God, there it is. Why couldn't I find it before? You know, because everything takes practice and getting used to it. Everything has a certain approach. Everything takes practice. Everything. Aren't doctors practicing medicine? You know, we're all practicing. The athletes are practicing. The musicians are practicing. The dancers are practicing. The cheerleaders are practicing. Everything we do, we're practicing teaching. I never teach, you know, 2 semesters the same way. Other questions about centering? Try to establish a flatter configuration, okay? Now we're going to drill the hole. We don't have a lot of distance to go down, okay? So less than 1/4 of an inch, maybe 1/8 of an inch. So First find the center of this little lump of clay. Because otherwise, if you just like start drilling down right away, you don't even know where the center is. So relax. Let your fingers naturally find, oh, there it is. Make a little indentation. There it is. Okay? You're going to drill straight down. Don't hit the bat. Right hand does the drilling, left hand comes in for support, and not up here, because then your wrist is still pivoting. Left hand comes in and is supporting it way down there to make that drilling hand more stable. Elbows in my rib cage. Find that, get back in that little indentation. Realize what you're doing. Then drill straight down. Don't let that spinning clay throw your hands off that central axis. Then let go slowly. I'll watch students have it centered and then they jerk their hands off and knock it off. Do not do that. Now, whenever you see a little protrusion at the lip, make sure you compress it. And how do you compress it? Just sort of grab it with the thumb and forefingers, or fingers of your left hand. Push down with your right hand, just to incorporate it into the rest of the clay. You don't want to lose it. You've wedged X amount of clay. You don't want to waste it spread out all over the bat. You don't want to waste it with the lip keep tearing off, having it tear off. Okay, so some of you are having really thick bottoms. Test it. We are able to test it with the needle. Right in the center. Put the needle in till it hits the bat. Put your fingernail in there where the clay ends. Pull it out. Okay, so you are going to lose a little bit when you cut it with the wire. But remember, you're going to press down with both thumbs so that you don't cut off more than you need to. Okay, sometimes you're going to lose a little more when you're smoothing it back and forth, right? So if you've gone too far, there's not much you can do. If you haven't gone enough, then by all means drill down some more, okay? We don't need any superfluous flesh. That's just, oops, that's not good. We don't need, another one. We don't need any extra clay or any heaviness to our pieces. All right, so I'm a little off. It's a little thick, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill down a little bit before I open up this donut. We now have a donut. We're going to stretch that donut and make it really wide. And we're going to pull it right towards our lap, or again, if it were a clock, 12, 6, 3, 9, you're going to pull it straight towards the 6. Okay, remember the orange dot or the yellow dot where the black mark is on the wheel head? That's, so if you have to take it off and put it back on, you can line it up and it would be back on the center. Okay. Right hand does the work. Once again, left hand comes in for support. Down at the bottom, gather your senses, utter your mantra, elbows in your rib cage. You're going to stretch this donut out. Don't let it go elliptical. It's going to want to go into an ellipse. Don't let it. Pull your fingers back into a 90-degree angle when you get down here. Let go slowly. We've opened up the floor. So, you see the messy floor, the throwing rings, the little bits of clay that come up. So again, the 3 reasons that we articulated on the blackboard again, the 3 reasons why we want to compress it. To avoid S-cracks, to make it smooth for cleaning, and to achieve good craftsmanship. If you were to look in a mug and you'd see that, you'd go, wow, what a sloppy potter. So, good craftsmanship. facilitate function by making it easier to clean, and for technical reasons, avoiding S-cracks. So how do we smooth that and compress it? Again, we've got our circle or our clock. If we work from the 3 to the center, back and forth along that radius of the circle, I'm just using a sponge to protect my fingertips, okay? From the 3, from that right 90-degree angle in the corner, across the radius to the center, back. Now you're not digging in a lot at first, okay? So here's my first little compression, gently. And what you're doing is if you have high points, you're giving a little more pressure. If you've got low points and valleys, then you're easing up. And you're sort of pushing the thicker areas to the thinner areas and moving that clay back and forth without digging it up. If you're digging it up and you're getting a whole bunch of clay in your fingertips and fingernails, you're digging too much too fast. Gently, because especially if it's really uneven, you've got to gradually push the thicker areas down to the thinner areas. Then you can get more refined with your actions. And then once it's pretty smooth and flat, then you can apply extra pressure. So, you know, you've smoothed it and flattened it for good craftsmanship and for easier, for cleaning ease. But then you can really start applying pressure to avoid the cracking. And the hand builders have to do this when they're making their coil pots, and some of you made coil pots in high school. How many got cracks on the bottoms of their coil pots? Anybody? Okay, always keep a tool around to scratch. Okay? You always get scratches when, you know, and then when your hands are all like...
So how do you like ensure that you have that 90-degree angle?
Okay, good question. When you're opening it up, your fingers are coming across, you just sort of pull them back.
So you like go in
Yeah.
and then pull out.
Mm-hmm. Well, not so much pull out, because you're still just running across the floor. You're just sort of pulling them back to create that angle down there.
Okay.
Whereas when we get to bowls, if you have an angle down there, it's going to be called a recurve, and it's not going to be a good thing. But I told you, for 6 weeks, we'll be making angles. Cylinders, mugs, pitchers. We're going to learn how to get the clay out of the corners without trimming. Yes, you can trim and put feet on mugs and pitchers, and they look lovely. They look so much more delicate and graceful. But we're going to first learn to get the clay out of the corners, because that was a bad habit that I developed, and I still struggle with it today. Did that answer? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so then, I don't make a wedge with my first pull. Wait a minute, I need a little bit more compression. Okay, then ease up, make it nice and smooth. Okay. And then always give that lip a little bit of compression too. Because that, you know, if it splits, if anybody had their lip split, that's from lack of compressing. So compress it periodically. Because you're stretching the clay, and if you haven't compressed those clay particles, it will split. Okay, so all the work is done between the 3 and the 6 of a clock, right? Get close. Fingertip to fingertip. That's what's working the walls, not this. You see a lot of beginners like this. First of all, you're too far away. Get up close and use your fingertips. And so then we talked about while we're centering, and by the way, that's the fastest the wheel is going to spin, while you're centering. After that, it gets consistently or continually slower. So while you're centering, you're creating a mold with your hands this way in which the clay is going to spin. But when you're pulling up the walls, you're creating a mold between your 2 fingertips, or between your 8 fingertips. So this space is where the clay is going to spin. It's going to spin within that space. So, what do you think? If your hands are moving, you're gonna get a tornado, which sometimes looks nice. But we're trying to control this medium, right? So, I don't make a wedge first because there's sort of like no place to put it. How do I keep my body steady? My stool is hitting the wheel. My elbows are anchored in my rib cage. Look at my thumbs are locked. Okay, let your thumbs get up close and personal. Start at the bottom. Work slowly and steadily. This is not a race. Don't come ripping up the wall. Gently, the lip is very vulnerable. Let go slowly when you get to the lip. We've been talking about cylinders, but you know how easy it is to make wide bowls because the inside hand is pushing too much. So instead of equal pressure to create a cylinder, maybe make a concerted effort to apply more pressure with the outside hand, and then maybe think of cone rather than cylinder. Then maybe you'll get a cylinder. Right? Makes sense? The clay will tell you what you're doing if you just look at it. Okay, so clean your bat so that you know where to take your shallow wedge tool and make your wedge, your shadow line. That allows you to get your fingers, and again, I have a habit all these years of using a sponge, okay? Then, by making that shadow line, it allows you to get your fingers under there, grab that clay, and pull it up. Little at a time, not all at once. Wherever my outside fingers are, I've got my inside fingers exactly opposite the wall, coming up the wall together, and letting go slowly at the lip, compressing the lip after every pull. If you don't come up together, if it's coming up like this, and you start to see a tornado, you know they're not together because they need that dual pressure, or the walls need. See? Don't use this tool with the longer slope, that's for something else. Okay, so as this gets taller, thinner, you've got to spin the wheels slower, and you've got to ease up on your pressure. You can't be like being a brute to this thing. Be nice. Okay, it has feelings too. Doesn't like to be brutalized. Okay, this is falling apart. Those cosmetic sponges, well, they used to sell these lovely cosmetic sponges that worked so well. They stopped manufacturing them. Now the ones they make are a little too thick. You can get them at Walgreens, but after they wear out a little bit, they'll flatten out. They're a little too thick right now. And they squeak. So you can tell when your fingers aren't together, you start to see little wamblies. I'm not sure that's a word, but... so, how much do we do this? That was the purpose of 2 weeks of cylinders. You know, the point is to figure out by sense of touch how thick are those walls, okay? We can test the bottom, we can't really test the walls. However, you know, I suppose we can. We can put our finger on the inside. I suppose we can insert the needle till it hits our finger on the inside and put our nail there. Ooh, then time to start shaping. I've never told that trick to any other class. You guys must be special. All right, I'm going to start shaping because that's pretty thin. but I want to give it a little collar so it doesn't get too wide on me. I can always widen it later. Now don't get it so narrow that you can't get your hand down there anymore, right? All right. How many have made coil pots? Just one? Okay. Well,
In like the second grade.
second grade.
Or like when I was little. I did
Yeah,
nothing.
yeah, okay. Well, you did it in high school, Anna.
Mhm.
So, if you remember, because I can describe shaping in 3 sentences, just like coiling in 3 sentences. If you want the form to go straight up, you pile the coils right on top of each other. If you want the form to bow out, you start piling up each coil on the outer edge of the bottom coil. If you want the form to start going in, you pile up each coil on the inner edge of each bottom coil. With this, obviously, we've been working on cylinders. If we want to make a straight wall, now see this one finger sticking out here is not a good thing. You should try to like put it to work. If you're trying to make a straight wall, basically it's equal pressure. If you want the form to bow out, which hand would be applying more pressure?
Inside.
Inside hand. If you want the form to start pressing in, which hand would apply more pressure? Outside hand. That's shaping in 3 sentences. That's it. That's it. But what do we have to do every step of the way? Keep them steady, right? If they're going out or in or straight up, they still have to be together. They like to be together. Your 8 fingers want to be together, okay? And steady. If they're like this, it's not going to cut it, okay? So, this sponge is falling apart. I'm going to go under that. Oops, it's hard to talk and throw at the same time. So, unless you're a genius, you should not be doing that. When you see little tornadoes occurring, just go back down there. It's just because your hands aren't together, so go back and bring it back. If it's off center, it will spin itself back on center if you apply a steady mold to it, basically. Calling that a mold, the space between your fingers. Okay, down at the bottom, I'm going to press in a little bit. And then I'm going to push out a little bit to make a little bulbous shape here. Then I'm going to push in a little bit. Now, you're not shaping it all in one turn, or all in one try, or all in one pull up the wall. You're shaping it gradually. So I gave it my overall shape just to start. So actually, you know, it's making rather a big mug, isn't it? With that small amount of clay, 1.5 pounds. Of course, it's going to shrink. I'm going to be trimming the lip. Now it shrinks twice. It shrinks as it goes from plastic clay to leather hard clay to bone dry. That shrinkage is due to evaporation of the water molecules, right? So the water molecules are evaporating, the clay particles are getting closer together, the piece shrinks. There's practically no shrinkage between the bone dry state and the bisque state. Practically no shrinkage. Then it shrinks again when we apply glaze and put it through the glaze firing and that vitrification process. Everyone remember what vitrification means? Very important to you potters, to you functional potters. During that vitrification or glassification phase, it shrinks again because the clay particles are getting even closer together. Okay, so Sometimes you think a piece is pretty big, and after it's fired, you'll hear students go, wow, that really got a lot smaller. All right, so then you've got your basic shape. You can start refining it. I want to accent that little indentation down there some more. I want to poof this out some more. And I want to maybe push this in a little bit. I'm making a little bit of a flare. Now see, if it gets really thin and wet, you got to be very careful. I want to poof this in, or push it in, not poof it in. Push it in. Whoops. But I don't want to trumpet it too much, not like a trumpet. Don't flare it too much. You can with a vase, but with a drinking vessel, it's going to dribble down your face. Now, we usually have a ruler hanging up there. Be sure to read the pages in your book. Robin Hopper is a perfectionist. He is a master functional potter. He tells you everything there is to know, even more than what I'm telling you. And there's a sort of a section called mouths, noses, and chins, mouths, noses, or something like that. When you think about a mug, whoops, let's see. Megan, can you grab me those 3 mugs over there? Thank you. Set them there, thanks. And just in case that wheel is on, I'll set them over here. The opening. The opening, don't you think, is pretty important for a variety of reasons. Your lips go on that lip, and how does it usually go? The top of the mug sort of hits the bridge of your nose, right? Robin Hopper says that opening needs to be between 3 and 3.5 inches, because that's usually the distance between the bottom of your upper lip and the bridge of your nose. I once made, when I was a young potter, I made some mugs for some people, and they said their nose doesn't fit in there. You know, if you get carried away and you make that opening real small, that'll be good for keeping your liquid warm, you know, but if your nose doesn't fit in it, you can't use the cup. I made another set of mugs once for a woman who has rather large hands, and she lived alone. She lived in an apartment, did not have a dishwasher. She had to wash everything by hand. Well, if you're washing mugs by hand, you're going to want to get down at the bottom a lot, periodically at least. You're going to want to get your sponge way at the bottom and clean that bottom of your mug. If your hand can't get down there, like it can't on this, or how about all the people that bring a mug to the office? Where are they washing their mugs? Not in a dishwasher, right, for disinfecting. They're washing it in the ladies' room, in the men's room, right? They have to be able to get their hand down there with the paper towel and the soap to get the crusties out of the bottom. So the opening is important. You know, so what happens is, though, but sometimes it might not look good. So the potter is always making a compromise between form and function. What's more important, form or function? Is it more important for it to function, maybe not be so beautiful, or is it more important to be beautiful and not function so much? That's a debate that probably will never be answered. Sort of like what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? So remember, if you can get your hand down there now, I can. Remember, it's going to shrink, though. So anyway, the potter is always compromising. Okay, I'll give a little bit on aesthetics to accommodate the function, or I'll give a little bit on function to accommodate for aesthetics. And so it's a challenge. It's a challenge. And the only way to learn how functional wear functions is to use your work. So Katie, you've taken this class before. hopefully you have used your mugs that you made in that class, and only then will your mugs be better this time around because you've used them. And which ones, are there some that you constantly leave in the cabinet?
Yeah, the smaller ones I think definitely need to start out bigger.
Mm-hmm.
It helps more.
Okay, so do you leave them in the cabinet just because they're small, or is there another issue?
I mean, overall, I think I probably learned even as I went with. We have to make 8, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think
You might have to make 12, girlfriend.
Okay.
That's what happens when you're advanced.
Just the overall craftsmanship, like you said, the opening, like some of them
Mhm.
are very small
Yeah.
and heavy. You
Heavy.
definitely want a lighter mug.
Yep. You don't want carpal tunnel syndrome just drinking your morning Joe, right? I mean, you know, it's your wrist is involved, and that too is discussed at length in the book. So read those pages. It's a wonderful supplement to my demo. The wrist has to lift this thing so there's weight to the mug. You're going to put liquid in there. Not so important now when we get to pitchers. Water alone is 8 pounds a gallon. So if you've got a pitcher that has some weight, because you know, clay is heavy. That's why we want to make the walls as thin as possible. Then you've got liquid in there, and if you have to strain yourself just to drink your morning coffee, we're half asleep anyway, remember? Or to pour your milk on your cereal or your orange juice, or you're serving guests your lemonade, or you know, you don't want to be straining your wrist or you will never choose that piece. You know, so the best way for Katie to improve this semester is to use everything she made in the first semester and try to figure out, why do I like these? Why do I not like those? So to perfect the function, the functional potter has to use her stuff. Okay? Because there's a lot to it. How we do? Ooh, okay. We're going to have to like wrap this up because we've got to put some handles on too. All right. So again, I had the basic shape. Now see, look at that. See, when you're not careful, you'll get these little tornadoes. But again, I'm trying to throw a form. But when it's poofing, I'm pushing more with the outside. When it's going in, I'm pushing more with the outside. Okay, so we talked a little bit about throwing rings, didn't we, on the cylinders? Yeah. So here's an example of if you wanted to paint something on your surface, then you do not want the presence of throwing rings to interfere with your brush stroke, because your brush stroke's going to break over those throwing rings. Now some potters have some glazes that look beautiful over throwing rings. You know, they look different on the high points and the glaze looks different on the low points. And the way the light, you can even see the way the light hits these throwing rings, the high points and the low points. It already is creating shadows and lights and darks. So some people who have glazes that look fabulous on those throwing rings, you know, they deliberately leave throwing rings. If you want a smooth surface to do some paintings, then we can use the ribs. Okay? If you're maybe carving it all away, you know, that's another issue as well. So, you know, you sort of have to know how you're going to decorate as well. So again, to show you how to use ribs, there's all kinds of ribs. There are potters that make their own ribs because obviously every potter in the world has these ribs and these too. I mean, there are basic ribs out there that every potter has because that's what's out on the market. There are potters though that make their own ribs to have their own unique shapes. Okay, you can, again, like I said, trace some of my ribs on old Kroger Plus cards or whatever, old hotel keys or whatever. They're great scrapers and ribs. So you can make a lot of your own tools. So if you did want to use a rib to smooth the outside, the rib is used in lieu of your outside fingers. But again, wherever the rib is, you must have that dual pressure of the inside hand pushing against it. Okay, otherwise you'll get tornadoes as well. The difficult thing, I mean, again, it's just like anything else, you have to get used to using ribs. Ribs are a little difficult. Yes, they'll get rid of like throwing rings if you want to get rid of throwing rings. But the problem is you're not touching the clay anymore. And this is a touchy-feely thing. And you can't touch the clay anymore, or you're not feeling the clay anymore. The rib is feeling the clay. So it gets a little tricky, okay? So just like with every other step of the way, you have to get used to it. So if I want to get rid of these throwing rings, I run it up the side of the wall, but you can't see it, but my inside fingers are exactly opposite the rib as the rib's coming up. So I just got an iPhone. I sort of like the ring. I have broken down and joined the masses, and now have a massive bill for me and my 2 children. What?
So you'll never go back.
I'll never go back. Yes, how did I live all these years without it? No. You walk in Verizon and you just know they got you. I could go into some anecdotes, but because we're taping, perhaps I won't. I'll keep it clean. Okay, so I have potters develop habits, and I've got this habit of this little line. Almost didn't realize it for a while until one of my colleagues once said, "That's your signature, that little line." I'm like, oh yeah, it is. Oh, that's right. But it also sort of divides the piece up and allows me to maybe texture one area and not another. Okay, so, you might see potters throwing with a mirror in front of them. I think we talked about that before. So that you're not constantly having to go like this. So like, a lot of times you're looking at it right from here, and from here it looks good. But when I get down and look at it from here, I don't like how wide that bottom is. Now, again, you have to have stability. If it's too wide, you don't want your mug falling over. But I think that's it looks a little clunky. Let's see if I can reduce it a little bit. It's getting a little late, but finger just jabbed the lip. It's a little better. So, again, now we're weighing balance with aesthetics. I thought visually it was too wide, but if you get it too narrow, it's not so stable. So back to my rib to get rid of the throwing rings that are now in there. So be aware that, sorry if my hair's in the way, I should tie it up. If I get this too thin right here, too thin, too wet, it could collapse right there. So be careful. Here's my little line tool that my friend told me was my signature. This is from when I was an undergraduate. This is an old tool. If I lose it, I will lose it. People have favorite tools. I should have a big chain attached to it, shouldn't I? Nice shadow line for a variety of reasons that we talked about before. I think we had about 3 reasons for that shadow line. I want to give it a little bit of a push in here. Now, if you want to do something like carving, you can't have the walls paper thin. So you have to think about that too. The other thing is if it's accidentally too thick, just saying, you could carve it to get some of the weight out of there. But don't tell anybody I told you that. All right, so if it dries out on the inside and your fingers are dragging, you can just run a little thin film down there. And I have to wrap this puppy up. Come on, see, I would starve to death if I had to do this for a living, right? I have a friend that makes a mug a minute. A mug a minute. But he says mine are much more beautiful. But I can only throw like 4 an hour. You wouldn't make it as a functional potter. If you want to make a living off of being a functional potter, you got to do a mug a minute. So, you know, if I'm going to do something here and I want it smooth, great. If I'm going to leave that the way it is, then maybe I can leave the throwing rings. I feel an air bubble. Not good. Maybe I can leave the throwing rings right at the top. I sort of like this indentation here. I'm going to refine that by just holding the rib there a second. Oops, and then I let it run up there. Not good. See, you know, you have to be sensitive. And you can't be talking. All right. Here's the deal. Sometimes needles are too fat, like that. Is that the metal needle? Don't, if I put out some tools to get you guys started. You should have your tools by and pull that off. But see, I didn't go down far enough because I was trying to preserve height. And so what happens is it sort of didn't make like a clean pull. See if I can like beat this into submission. All right, so remember what we said. When you cut it, you've got these 2 sharp edges, right? Paper towel. And remember, the paper has a grain, so if you tear along the grain, you'll get little strips. Now, some potters use chamois cloth, those nice soft, like suede-like cloths that people polish their car with. But what happens is chamois would fall in the slip barrel, and they get so slimy that they blend in with the slip. The throwing bucket goes in the slip barrel over there. The slip barrel over there goes in the clay mixer. The clay mixer goes into your clay. It comes into your barrels. And you'll be throwing this nice big beautiful pot. And you'll feel a lump. And you'll go to, what is that lump? Jab, 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 jab. Dig it out. Dig out the chamois out of the side of your beautiful pot. And you got a big hole in your pot. So we don't use those anymore. Just in case you're wondering, we use strips of paper towel, lay it down. Okay, so it's not so level, is it? But I don't have time to trim it again. Round that lip. Your lip is covered with a really sensitive layer of skin. That if this lip is sharp, it's too thin, it doesn't feel good, it's uneven on your lips, you're never going to use the cup. On the other hand, if it's too thick, your lips are going to be parted too much, and you're going to dribble latte down your chin as well, and it's a little unsightly for young ladies. Okay? So this is a good thickness. Nice and round. How do we look? well, we're gonna have to do. Now where are all the, oh, here, there's one. I know I've hung several of these up here. You are gonna push down with the wire. It's got a kink in it, that's not good. Push with both thumbs, get it under that shadow line, oops. Big puddle at the bottom. You can put your little, you guys have a throwing sponge? Put it, loop it through your tool, soak that puddle out. Okay, that's 1, 2, shadow line. Bevel the shadow line with your sponge. You don't want it sharp. Trim your lip, round your lip. Okay? Push down with both thumbs against the bat, scooch it under that shadow line, pull it through. We're not cutting these in half unless you feel like you need to come in and warm up. You know, like what do we do when we work out? We warm up. What do we do before we run? We do, you know, we do exercises before we do anything. We play the piano, we do scales to warm up, right? If you want to warm up with a few cylinders, cut them in half, check it out, then throw some mugs, okay? We've got a few minutes to put handles on. Let's switch back to this